Welcome to another installment of Yoga Therapy Graduates. Where am I today? We have Denyse Lefever, our esteemed guest. She's from not far from where our yoga center was established in Pennsylvania. However, she decided to grow up and be in Northern Virginia and then have to commute back home to have her yoga therapy training. She is working with a host of people that I want her to describe and tell you her story. And normally, Denyse, we just start out hearing, how did you cross paths with yoga?
Okay, well, I had a forward-thinking mom who, when I was 16, was convinced I was going to have a nervous breakdown. So she sent me to Springfield High School yoga program at night. It was for adults. I was the youngest person in the class. And I was sent so I could take my SATs and then contemplate my future because I was stressing about it. And I took to it like a fish in water, was an avid yogi up until my 30s. And then my career took a very different path and I kind of drifted away from it for a while.
Okay. So you used yoga, you became busier in your career. When did you come back and why?
I came back when I moved from upstate New York in the area of Binghamton, which was a very tranquil place. We were living in a very rural area, which I learned to love. And I got a job transfer and a promotion to Northern Virginia. And the stress of this area just drove me through the roof. I had job stress. There was stress of the people. There was stress of pricing. And I started to and then I was diagnosed right after I moved with type 2 diabetes. And so I thought, I need to get back into yoga. So I went to a local yoga studio and started a yoga class and got fascinated by the fact that I noticed my blood sugars were better when I did yoga. And when I asked my doctor about it, she's like, oh, no, just don't eat mangoes. So I got really intrigued because my yoga teacher at the time had a retreat in Mexico. I went on that retreat. I forgot to take my diabetes medication. I was eating all vegetarian. I was doing yoga twice a day and my blood sugar was normal. So I came back and I said, something's wrong with this picture. Maybe it's stress. And she said, oh, no. It's all about what you eat. And so I started to do my own research and started to find some outliers, which now are mainstream thinkers in the medical world. And of course, yoga is very, very beneficial. In fact, I volunteer at a local hospital as part of the diabetes prevention program, and I offer a yoga-based stress reduction lecture.
Now, were you doing yoga on your own in that little hiatus time before you came back, or did it just kind of slip away?
I would say it slipped away. When I was up in New York State, I had a job that I absolutely loved, but it was crazy. And when I started yoga, there weren't yoga studios.
Right.
You went into people's homes or it was in a high school gym. And so when I was in New York, downtown Binghamton had a yoga studio. And I walked in and they were all doing this power yoga. And I just freaked out. I mean, nobody asked me what my background was. And the next thing I know, they're going up into headstands. And I'm like, ooh, I was only in my 40s and I could probably still do a headstand, but I didn't trust that environment because I had gotten heavier. I wasn't as healthy as when I was younger. And I thought, I need to find something else. And I just never found it when I was up in that area. I know it existed. I just was too busy to seek it out.
Gotcha. So then, just for our timelines then, how old were you when you went to this Mexico retreat?
When I went on the Mexico retreat, I would have been just a little over 50. I think I just turned 50. And so that's when I just got back into it.
And then you got back into it in Northern Virginia. And then you obviously must have taken a yoga teacher's training at that time.
Yeah. So flash forward a couple years. So I moved here in 2004, was diagnosed in 2005. And then I had feet problems when I was up in New York, and I had one foot surgery when I was in New York. When I came down here, the other foot started to act up. I had a surgery that didn't go well. And I really felt horrible. And I remember lying in bed, actually thought I was going to be crippled. The doctor told me, you're not going to do yoga. You're not going to golf anymore. The things that I was liking to do, he said, I don't think you're going to be able to do any of those things. So I called my yoga teacher. I actually emailed her and I said, okay, I am too young to be feeling this old. Please tell me where I can go to learn more about in-depth yoga teacher training. I don't want to teach because this is just about healing myself. And so her teacher had just left the studio she was at, and she partnered up with another studio here in Virginia. And that's how I started my teacher training program.
Gotcha. And so then you did that just to learn more about yoga and to be able to teach yourself, it sounds like.
Yes. And the teacher that I started training with had a background in yoga therapy. She had trained with Jessica Shar. And so that got me very, very interested. So I immediately, after I graduated from my first 200-hour training, there was a little bit that went on to getting that. But after I finished that, I immediately went and got a second 200-hour training in yoga therapy through the Joseph LePage method out of Kripalu. It was an independent teacher that taught that method. And then at that point, the whole yoga therapy certification still hadn't been decided. And I was just watching the programs emerge. And I had gone to Duke University to take their therapeutic yogas for seniors. And that's when the light bulb went off, as I saw those teachers working with heart patients, cancer patients, Parkinson patients. I remember pausing in the hallway with the tears just rolling down my face when a man in his executive years recovering from a heart attack said, yoga changed my life. I can feel now for the first time. I appreciate my family more. And I just thought, this is where I want to be. This is my retirement career. And so then I began looking for a program. And your program became available initially through East Meets West in Virginia. And then you offered it in Pennsylvania, and it was spitting distance from my mom's house. So I thought, great, I get to spend time with mom and finish up the yoga therapy certification.
And so what brought you to doing our program after all of this experience?
Well, I felt that I wanted to do something with people in a more therapeutic setting that would most likely not be in a yoga studio. So I knew I had to be credentialed. I knew that just having interest wasn't enough. And quite frankly, a lot of people told me that the Duke credential went a long way. But when I saw there was an actual certification program, I really wanted to get more grounded in where it looked like the industry was going. And your program was already in the certification process. And I think you were one of the first to be certified. So It was just kind of like everything lining up that way.
Okay. Because each approach is different.
Yes.
And so you've experienced a lot of different approaches. How about, what would we say? What's that like?
Well, I'm a geek. I'm a person that has to learn and learn and learn before I develop a sense of confidence. And I would say that your program helped build that confidence. The case studies that you did, the interaction with Erin when we had the personal settings and the mentorship, that was really important to me in terms of how I grew. And I also really appreciated the research project we did, because that's what really got me grounded in looking for evidence-based methodology. And when I first got employed by the current hospital, the first thing the director said to me is, if you have other evidence-based principles that we can apply to this program, bring them forward. So, I mean, the training I got at Comprehensive Yoga Therapy was really, really important for the work that I'm doing now.
So, well, what are you doing?
So what am I doing? So let's look at graduation day, June 2017.
Yeah.
Being the person that I was in my yoga journey, all of a sudden I just felt like I couldn't do yoga therapy. I was convinced, okay, I just spent 3 years doing this. Now, what the heck am I going to do with it? And I thought, well, I learned a lot personally, but what am I going to do with it? That September, my husband was diagnosed with a poor heart. And in November, we found out that he had congestive heart failure and needed a heart valve replacement. So he went into the hospital November 17th, came out of the hospital to do acute care December 23rd, and was in acute care to January 9th. He had 3 surgeries in that time. I was with him along the way. And all of my ideas of inserting yoga therapy into a hospital setting went out the window, as he was in the ICU for 3 weeks, actually closer to 4. And as I watched all the people that touched him and how busy everybody was, it's like, where are you going to put yoga therapy? Well, when he went to acute care, the occupational therapist and the physical therapist, when my husband said to them, oh, these things you're doing, my wife does them. She's a yoga teacher. So they started asking me questions, and I told them what I did. And they said, there's a real place for your skills here. We have a very targeted outcome that we're looking for, but patients really need to be heard, seen, and felt. And we think there's a role for yoga therapy in that. So I got really interested, and I thought, okay, great. As my husband recovered, and it took a long time, I saw his condition. I thought, here I am, type 2 diabetes. That's me in the future, unless I do something. I mean, congestive heart failure is a symptom of diabetes complications. So I thought, that's me in the future, unless I do something quickly. So I decided I was going to get certified as a diabetes prevention educator, which I did at University of Virginia. And then I went out and naively started to ask people about hiring me, and it just wasn't going anywhere. And I couldn't really do anything anyway, because I was still caregiving for my husband, but I was doing the research. And then one of my husband's cardiologists looked at me and he goes, you are spending far too much time taking care of your husband. It's great. You're doing great work, but you need to get a life. And about that time, I had 2 friends reach out, one who was in an assisted living facility for military veterans. And I got a part-time job there, subbing for her, teaching chair yoga and gentle yoga. My oldest patient was 100. And that I had so much joy doing that. And then about the same time, my friend who taught at Life with Cancer said, I want to retire, but I'm not going to do it unless you agree to take over my class. And I said, well, I just got my husband's doctor's orders to do that. So, okay. So that started a full year after I graduated from the yoga therapy program. And then all of a sudden, as I worked initially with group classes and then most recently one-on-one, I finally got what yoga therapy was all about. And it's very rewarding work.
So what is it about?
It's about meeting the patient where they are. And we've heard that over and over again. And I think of things that you have said, it's just help them find their breath, help them find joy, whether that's through a guided meditation, whether it's through a breathing practice, whether it's through a mantra or a mudra, whatever works for them is going to make them have a better sense of ease than when you walked in the door. And that's just been my experience so far.
So you use a variety of techniques or skills just based on the person's,
yes,
like what matches them, as opposed to going in with a specific protocol.
Yes. So when I'm doing bedside, when I teach a yoga class, I teach restorative and I do some yoga nidra. That's pretty straightforward. But when I go bedside and work one-on-one, I introduce myself. Usually I say mind body therapist instead, because if you say yoga therapist, they think you're going to put them into down dog and they're like, look at me, I'm in bed, I've got IVs, I can't do that. So I usually say I'm here to offer you some breathing practices or guided meditation if you feel that will ease you. Well, just 2 weeks ago, I had an older gentleman, and he just said to me, oh, I do breathing. I have congestive heart failure. I have cancer. I breathe my way through it. Well, as he was talking to me, and I was, sometimes you just hold space, and I was listening to his story. He was starting to get emotional, and I just said, okay, do me a favor. Just let out a big exhale. And he let out the exhale. He goes, oh, I haven't tried breathing that way. That was nice. So again, relatively simple, but because of the training I have, it feels more intuitive.
So it's
it's become a part of you. I would say yes. I would say yes. Saying? Kind of like if a musician, if you were a musician and they would just tell you a song they love and you would be so good that you would hit the piano keys and know the tune. Yes. It almost sounds like that. It sounds that way. And it took a long time for me to trust that intuition and recognize it was with me all along, because I lived up here through my career, and I lived up here in my decision making. And I really, I say the last 5 years, especially since my husband's heart surgery, the gift he gave to both of us is we both now live more from our hearts. We learned how to do that through his illness. So that was going to be my next question, but I want to have you explain that a little more in detail. So my question was, of course, before you said that, it was going to be, well, how did you get in touch with your intuition? And now you said by kind of following my heart. Right. But how about if you just explain as an example, like what's an example of following my heart instead of my head? Okay. So in the hospital, I get to read their charts, the patient's charts. So not only do I see what kind of cancer they have, I get to see all of the prescriptions and everything. Now, if I was my old Denyse, I would see, oh my God, this person has this, and this. What did I learn about treating these symptoms? Now I read the charts for information, and then I forget it when I walk in the room. I look at the person, I ask them how they are, I assess, and I don't do the full assessments like we did in our training, but I assess where they are. I listen to what they're saying. I try to read emotions, and I will also be able to see what religion they are. So I'll get a sense of, where their belief system may or may not be. And then I'll ask them if they want to try something, and I'll describe it first and usually get a reaction. And if that one doesn't work, I'm not afraid to shift. It's not, in the past, it would have been, oh my God, I have one card up my sleeve. Now what am I going to do? But now I feel like I have a toolkit and I can transfer them. And the other thing that I'm very fortunate with, there are 2 other yoga therapists that started at the same time I did. There was actually a colleague of ours that really introduced this program. We all shadowed her, and we have the support of one another to kind of share information, which is really beneficial. Oh, that's great. Yeah. So obviously, you know me. So you brought up belief systems. So I kind of know when she says things, I know her pretty well and I understand what you're saying. But as I sit here as the interviewer, so you've referred to holding space. Okay. And again, I've felt you hold space just by who you are. I think it's one of your gifts. Oh, well, so why don't you tell us? Yeah. And I mean, most of our yoga therapists, I think in the training, they improve their ability. But what does it mean to hold space on the giving and receiving side? I think it means deep listening is a term I've heard used before to describe it. I let them express whatever they want to say. I withhold judgment. If it's something I need clarification on, I'll ask them to tell me more. So again, that inquiry that we learned in yoga therapy comes in very, very heavily into this process. I have watched myself make my own judgments based on what I've read, only to be thoroughly surprised by how spiritual a person was, regardless of what the religion was, and wanted to participate in a breath practice and would ask me if they could pray with it. And I'd say, absolutely. That's your practice. I'm just going to show you a breathing practice that as you pray may bring more ease. So when somebody has what you said, like space to pretty much say anything, and now we have to figure they're in a jam in their life. They're in a difficult situation here. Their life, it's life or death in some cases, right? Yes. With these conditions. So it doesn't matter who you are. That's pretty tough.
So I'm going to imagine when you hold space, you hear quite a bit.
Yes. And I will tell you that I had a very personal situation last month. Um, I'm so sorry. Should have put this in the other room. I was diagnosed myself with thyroid cancer this past spring. And I was worried this would actually interfere with me being able to do this kind of work. But fortunately, because I'm in a hospital environment, they were very supportive and said, we'll wait for you. Take whatever time you need. And we think you're going to be even more valuable after having this experience. Well, thyroid cancer, I am so
That's
sorry.
okay. Don't worry about that. It's all right.
So thyroid cancer is a cancer that it's debated, but some people in the world call it the good cancer, which is a misnomer. You should never do that. So I felt like I had a false sense of security. I'm in pretty good shape. Well, I walked into the ward. There were 3 people admitted into the hospital with thyroid cancer, 2 who were on hospice, 1 who was 29 years old. And with thyroid cancer, it can metastasize to the lungs or the bones next. And the 29-year-old had it all through his bone structure, his skeletal structure. And I just looked and I read their cases and I thought, I'm not in a place. I can't do this now. So I excused myself and left the ward and just took some time for me to breathe and give myself space. And then when I came back in, I work with a social worker and a nurse navigator. The social worker came out and she said, there's a gentleman over here that I think could use your help. And that man just talked for 40 minutes about his medical condition, his fears, everything that was going on in his life. And I just listened. And that's what he really needed.
So that was just bottled up inside of him.
Yes. Yes. And he got very emotional as he spoke. This is also the same gentleman who said that he knew how to breathe. And so when he had one of his emotional outbursts, we just breathed together.
So, yeah, I think in these situations, when you go through this, your family members go through it because, your close friends go through it. So to them, it's hard to vent because they're also sad.
Right.
They have their own, difficult time as well, even though they're not the one who's sick.
Yes. And that was it.
So you don't really have a chance sometimes as the patient to actually speak your mind in an intimate family setting because that would be even harder for them to hear.
Right. A number of these patients, when I walk into their room, will say to me, I don't need yoga therapy, but my caregiver does. And so sometimes it's not unusual that we will do a guided meditation together, the caregiver and the patient.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. So you're, in a way, then another thing that I hadn't thought of is this head heart thing. Modern medicine is kind of a head thing, right? And there's not a lot of insurance coverage for the heart. You know what I mean? How do you?
I think it's changing though. I really do.
Good.
Well, at least at my hospital, I am seeing, they're really pushing an integrative approach, which they call person care or person-centered care.
Oh, nice.
I had, again, this week, I was blown away because, initially the medical staff are a little resistant to this yoga therapist coming on. Well, the woman that was the nurse who was head of the ward, she came running up to me as I was going through the census and she goes, oh, magical yoga lady, there is a woman in such and such room who's so stressed out. Could you please go see her? So it's like, okay, they're starting to see a benefit of maybe you can help somebody.
So it kind of goes back to you being in Mexico, having the benefit of somebody else cooking this great food and some really cool people, some beautiful weather, nice, all this good yoga and so forth. It's almost like you're bringing them that.
That's a good way of looking at it.
And you and I know when we study various research that that the nervous system, okay, just to simplify it, if it has a lot of stress, everything else in the body's like systems, the immune system, the nervous system, think of any system you want, your heart, your cardiovascular, your heart rate goes up, your digestion decreases, like everything gets thrown off. So imagine you have a life and death diagnosis. I mean, stress is therefore going to cause you to even, go down further. Many people become depressed over time.
Yes.
So yeah, that's really fantastic.
Yeah. No, and again, I think of you often because I've gotten fascinated now that I have experience with my dad with Alzheimer, myself with type 2 diabetes, my husband with heart, and now me with cancer. And I've done lifestyle research on all of them, and they all say the same thing. So I'm looking at putting together a little lifestyle mini course
Beautiful.
for people that want to work on this. And I remember talking to you about how your course in India, how they offered the same class, and in the morning it was the diabetics that walked in, and then it was the next group. And so I kind of want to cut through that and say,
very nice.
If you practice these principles, it really doesn't matter. As I tell my mother, something's going to get you, but there's a certain amount of control that you have in terms of how you manage it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's amazing. So that was going to be one of my wrap it up questions, was where are you headed next? And it sounds like this course is where you're headed next.
I think that's what I really want to do. I guess there's two things that are happening. I always have too many ideas and not enough time. As a result of working with the cancer patients, I joined an organization called the Society of Integrative Oncologists. And there's actually 50 yoga therapists that are part of that. And that organization has been incredibly helpful to me personally as I went through my own journey, and also in terms of creating awareness of other people doing it. And they're getting ready to augment some training, especially for the bedside portion, because there's a lot of yoga for cancer trainings out there and different ways to do yoga with cancer patients. But recognizing the difference between where a person is on what they call the cancer continuum is something that you don't often get in a lot of trainings.
Yeah. And it's when we do something on a shorter duration, it's hard to convey that. Like, you've referred to holding space. Well, we spend all those years just introducing the idea. Now our program has online courses,
right,
that people do as homework just for the listening. And then we do practice listening, and it's really hard to. So what Denyse is saying that I know she's good at, and I know almost all of our graduates are basically achieve this, is you're listening. And when you said not judging, yes, that means in your mind, the person is there, not your next statement, or not your, this is what you should do, your next advice thing. You are literally like an angel there.
Yes. And sometimes, as you said, Bob, sometimes all they need is an independent person to listen, because they worry about the burden they're putting on their family members and caregivers.
Right. And then there's something inherently transformative, which is almost not like transformation that you have to work at. It's just sometimes as human beings, being heard allows us to move on in the acceptance process. Which then once we've accepted a situation, then we can start to work towards resolving it. But if we're all bound up and I haven't been able to find my Denyse in the world, I'm like this, and I'm, oh my gosh. And if I can tell you that I'm afraid, you'll say, well, yeah. And then I go, oh, it's okay.
Yeah.
You're like, yes, Bob, it's okay, or whatever, and then you give me that assurance. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, really? And it opens a person up. And I think when somebody hears yoga, right, like you said, they think the pretzel or whatever else, the headstand, and hear what you're saying is presence, heart, meeting a person with what they actually need. And that's where I say, I call it capital Y yoga now a lot.
Yeah.
And where you're just thinking, what is it that connects a person to their higher self? And let's get them connected. And once they're connected there, then they can start to really make steps forward. And then it sounds like you use your yoga practices after that.
Yep.
So that's great. So yeah, let's keep in touch on your project.
Okay, that sounds great.
And I think I would like to say, how would I say this? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
really.
On behalf of us for all that you've done, and for how many people you're touching. We're so proud of you, quite frankly.
Well, thank you.
And I say that, I know as people listen, if you can imagine somebody who was afraid to teach a yoga class when we met her, even though she did 2 yoga teachers trainings, she's laughing because and I'd be like, everybody would, okay, maybe we need to hold a lot of space for Denyse, but she was so capable and so intelligent. And now you've brought it all to light, and that's so wonderful. So thank you for letting people hear your story. Maybe you're going to inspire a few people, I think, because now they feel like, hey, if Denyse overcame this, I could.
Well, I really, really, really am enjoying my life now, and yoga is a big part of it for sure.
Yeah. Well, once again, thanks so much for sharing, and we'll continue to make new chapters.
All right. Thank you so much, Bob.
All right.
Hope to see you next month.
Yes, absolutely.